The diamond earrings glittered under the jeweler's loupe, each facet catching light in a way that felt almost symbolic. Richard Rick Dawson adjusted the magnification, examining the stones with the same meticulous focus he once applied to construction blueprints. $15,000 was a lot of money, even for a man who had built Dawson materials from nothing. But his daughter Emily deserved something extraordinary on her wedding day. "These will be perfect for such a special occasion," the sales associate said, repositioning the velvet display with practiced elegance. She had been patient with Rick's methodical process, the kind of patience reserved for older men who bought expensive things with careful calculation. A wedding is such a once-in-a-lifetime moment. "Yes," Rick murmured. "My daughter's wedding. I want everything to be perfect." The words carried more weight than he intended. It had been 10 years since his wife Margaret passed away. 10 long years of trying to fill a void that never truly closed. Emily's wedding was a reminder of everything he had lost and everything he still hoped to protect. Soft classical music floated through the Tiffany boutique, wrapping the space in an atmosphere of curated sophistication. Customers moved quietly from case to case, absorbing the luxury the way one inhales incense in a cathedral. Rick had worked his entire life to earn moments like this, moments when he could give his daughter the kind of life he never had. His phone buzzed in the pocket of his jacket. He barely glanced at it, expecting a message about a concrete delivery or a permit delay. But the words on the screen froze him in place. "Don't go to the wedding. Run." The message came from an unfamiliar number. He read it again and again. His fingers tightened around the edges of his phone, his heart thudding against his ribs. The diamonds in front of him blurred as a cold ripple of unease crept up his spine. "Sir, are you all right? You look a little pale." The associate's voice sounded far away, as if underwater. Her concerned expression penetrated through the haze, but Rick forced himself to breathe and mutter something about wedding nerves. A lie came easy. Years of business negotiations had trained him to stay composed under pressure. But inside, questions spread through his mind like cracks in a foundation. Who sent this? Why him? Why now? He dialed the number immediately. It rang and rang, each tone ratcheting his anxiety higher. No voicemail, no answer, nothing but mechanical repetition. He tried again with the same result. His signature on the credit card receipt came out shaky, the gold pen slipping awkwardly in his fingers. The associate wrapped the earrings in Tiffany blue packaging, adding the signature white bow before handing him the small bag. He thanked her and walked out into the mall, gripping the bag tightly against his side as if someone might try to snatch it. The Mall of America, normally comforting in its vast anonymity, suddenly felt hostile. Every passerby became a potential threat. Every phone held by a stranger could be recording him. Someone out there knew about the wedding, knew his number, and wanted him afraid. He wandered to a small cafe near the food court, needing the familiar ritual of coffee to ground him. He stirred the cream endlessly, watching it swirl like a concrete mixer, his thoughts spiraling just as chaotically. The Tiffany bag sat on the table like a reminder of how quickly a perfect day could fracture. He checked his phone over and over 17 times in less than an hour. No new message, no explanation, just dread. Then the second message arrived. "I'll explain everything later, but don't go home today. Trust me." Rick stared at the words, his logical mind rejecting the idea of taking commands from an anonymous stranger. At 68, he had decades of experience demanding credentials, verifying sources, refusing to make decisions without proof. But underneath that logic, something deeper and far more primal told him to listen. He dialed the number again. Ring after ring, no answer. Whoever was sending these warnings controlled the communication. A young barista approached with fresh coffee, another refill. "Sir," she asked, concern creasing her features. "Make it a double shot," Rick said. The caffeine wouldn't steady him, but the routine of ordering something familiar brought a fleeting sense of normalcy. He considered going home to Minnetonka. He imagined pouring himself a whiskey, brushing this off as a prank. But the instinct that had carried him through business for 40 years screamed that this wasn't just paranoia. Before he realized what he was doing, he found himself calling the Hilton Minneapolis downtown. "I need a room," he said. "Tonight," within minutes. He had a reservation room 815 business class. The decision felt both reckless and inevitable. He didn't call Emily, didn't call her fiancé Brandon, didn't call Linda, his assistant. No need to worry anyone until he understood what was happening. One night in a hotel would give him space to think. The drive downtown took nearly 40 minutes. He kept checking the rearview mirror, though he wouldn't know real surveillance if it stared him in the face. His mind replayed the messages again and again, each time tightening his chest a little more. The hotel lobby shimmered with polished marble and warm lighting. The familiar symbols of expensive comfort should have been reassuring, but Rick felt only dread as he rode the elevator to the 8th floor. Room 815 was spotless, almost sterile, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Minneapolis skyline. Yet none of it brought comfort. The silence pressed against him like weight. He ordered room service twice, showered for nearly an hour, flipped through every news channel. But his mind kept circling back to the same two messages. Someone wanted to keep him away from the wedding, and someone didn't want him going home. Who, why? And what did they know that he didn't? The city glittered through the windows of room 815, a view that should have felt comforting. Rick had seen Minneapolis from every angle over the years: job sites, corporate towers, charity events, business dinners. But tonight, the skyline felt foreign. His phone lay on the nightstand, black screen reflecting his anxious face each time he glanced at it. He dialed the mysterious number again, the same endless ringing. No voicemail, no explanation, just the steady, mechanical chime of unanswered calls. Whoever was behind the messages had no intention of giving him answers on his terms. Dinner arrived: perfectly cooked steak, roasted vegetables, and a bottle of 18-year-old Macallan that cost more than most people made in a week. He signed the bill without thinking, tipping the server generously in hopes the young man wouldn't remember anything except Rick's kindness. The moment the waiter left, the silence returned, swallowing the room whole. Outside, the city buzzed with Friday night energy couples heading to restaurants, groups laughing on their way to concerts, families enjoying a rare night out. Normal life carried on, unaware that one man's world was shifting beneath his feet. By 11:47 p.m., Rick tried calling the number for the 8th time. The phone rang. Once, twice, then it answered. He snatched the phone to his ear. "Hello?" A familiar voice emerged, gravelly but steady. "Rick, it's Tom. Tom Gallagher." Rick froze. For a moment, he was thrown back 8 years to late-night arguments, lawyers drafting dissolution documents, and the bitter end of a friendship he once considered unbreakable. "Tom," he breathed, "after all this time. What's going on?" "Sorry for the theatrics," Tom said quietly. "I had to make sure you'd listen. I didn't think you'd pick up if you saw my name." Rick sank onto the edge of the bed, heart pounding. "Why are you sending me warnings? What's this about?" Tom hesitated, a long, heavy silence that stretched impossibly thin. "Today," he said finally, "I was at Attorney Whitmore's office, sort of an estate thing for my aunt. While I was waiting, I overheard a conversation. And Rick, it was about you." Rick gripped the phone tighter. "About me? From who, your daughter?" Tom said softly, "Emily and her fiancé, Brandon." Rick's pulse quickened. His mind raced, searching for benign explanations, but the tone in Tom's voice told him none existed. "What did they say?" Rick whispered. "I can't talk about it over the phone," Tom replied. "Too risky. Come meet me tomorrow morning at the Guthrie Theater, the endless bridge overlooking the river. 10 a.m. and come alone." "Tom, one more thing." Tom cut in. "Bring everything important, documents, passwords, whatever you'd need if you couldn't go home for a while." The line went dead. Rick stared at the phone, icy dread seeping through him. The city lights reflected off the glass, shimmering like scattered diamonds. Emily's wedding was less than 24 hours away. Everything should have been simple. Father walks daughter down the aisle, gives a speech, watches her begin a new life, a milestone, a memory. But now, what could possibly force Tom Gallagher, the man Rick once trusted more than a brother, to deliver warnings like these? By the time Rick fell into a restless sleep, dawn was only a few hours away. The phone rang at 6:18 a.m., jolting him upright. But it wasn't Tom this time. It was room service calling to confirm his breakfast order. The normalcy felt surreal, almost insulting. Coffee, eggs Benedict, fresh fruit. He had eaten thousands of business breakfasts in his life, but none while preparing for what felt like war. After showering, he dressed in his most conservative suit, dark charcoal, crisp white shirt, understated tie. Clothes had always been armor, and today he needed every advantage. The businessman in him would not go down quietly. Checkout took exactly 8 minutes. He paid cash for the incidentals to keep the night untraceable. If Emily and Brandon were watching his movements, he wanted them guessing. The morning air felt sharp as he walked to the parking garage. Minneapolis was waking up commuters grabbing coffee, joggers along the river, office workers heading to elevators. None of them knew the storm brewing inside the man walking past them. By 9:52 a.m., Rick parked near the Guthrie Theater. The Mississippi River flowed steadily below the endless bridge, sunlight glinting off the water. It was a peaceful scene, too peaceful for the dread churning in his gut. Tom Gallagher appeared at 1000 a.m. sharp. He looked older, thinner, hair grayer, but the guilt in his eyes was instantly recognizable. "Rick," Tom said quietly. Rick stepped forward. "Tell me everything. Now." Tom exhaled sharply. "I wish I didn't hear it. I wish it wasn't true. But Emily..." She was in Whitmore's office discussing guardianship procedures. Rick blinked. Guardianship. That's for people declared mentally incompetent. Tom finished. The words hit Rick like a hammer. His knees nearly buckled. "I heard her telling Whitmore." Tom continued. "Dad barely leaves the house anyway. We'll have witnesses about his memory problems." Rick shook his head. "No, Emily wouldn't." But Tom pressed on. She talked timelines, evidence, medical evaluations, and everything needed to get a court to hand over control of your estate. Rick's breath came shallow. Why? Why would she do that? Tom swallowed, because Brandon kept asking Whitmore about business transfer procedures. Asset liquidation, your company's valuation. They want Dawson materials. Rick, all of it. Rick stared out at the Mississippi River, its calm current, a cruel contrast to the chaos inside him. "What else did you hear?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Tom hesitated before answering, and when he did, his words cracked open the last bit of denial Rick had left. "They were talking about selling your company, and they already have buyers lined up." Rick's vision blurred. No, not Emily, not his little girl. But the truth was standing right in front of him, and it was only the beginning. Rick pressed both hands against the cool railing of the endless bridge, staring down at the river as if the Mississippi itself could somehow wash away what Tom had just told him. The water slid past in steady, indifferent currents. His world, meanwhile, was violently tilting. "Tell me everything," Rick said again, more quietly this time. "I need every detail." Tom nodded, the movement slow and reluctant. "I sat in Whitmore's waiting room for almost 40 minutes. Emily and Brandon didn't know I was there. They met with Whitmore in his private office, and the door wasn't fully closed." Rick's grip tightened on the railing, knuckles whitening. They were discussing medical evaluations. Tom continued. Brandon asked if Whitmore could recommend doctors who were cooperative. That was the word he used. Cooperative. He shook his head, disgusted. "Emily kept talking about how you seemed forgetful lately, how you were getting easily confused. She said it was time to take protective measures." Rick closed his eyes. He remembered every recent conversation with Emily, the soft suggestions that he seemed tired, the questions about whether he needed help managing the business, the way she'd watched him when he misplaced his glasses or hesitated before answering a question. At the time, he thought it was concern. Now, each moment felt like evidence gathering. Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notepad. I wrote everything down as soon as I left the office. You know me, Rick. I don't trust my memory completely anymore. He held the notes out. Read it. Rick scanned the shaky handwriting, each line a blow to the chest. Brandon asking about selling the company. Emily talking about getting witnesses, guardianship procedures, medical evaluation scheduled soon. Whitmore advising them on asset control after guardianship. Then one line that made Rick's stomach drop. Discussed staging an episode at the wedding reception. Rick looked up sharply. What kind of episode, they said, Tom murmured. That if you seemed confused, agitated, or overwhelmed at the reception, it would support the case that you weren't fit to manage your affairs anymore. Rick stared at him in disbelief. So the wedding was going to be a setup. Tom nodded. They want everything to look natural. They want your entire family as witnesses. They want the court to believe the decline is real. The sun fell too bright. The air too thin. Rick's heartbeat pounded in his ears, and that's not all. Tom added, I overheard Brandon asking about moving assets into his and Emily's names. He asked if it could be done before the competency hearing. The world seemed to narrow into a single point of cold clarity. They're planning to steal everything, Rick whispered. Tom's voice softened. Rick, I know this is devastating, but I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. Rick swallowed hard. Why warn me? After everything we went through, Tom looked away. Shame flickering across his features. Because you gave me a chance when nobody else would, because I still owe you for that, and because, family or not, what they're doing is evil. Rick didn't speak. He couldn't. There were no words strong enough to contain the betrayal boiling inside him. After a moment, Tom stepped closer. You need to be careful. Whitmore is well connected. If Emily and Brandon are working with him, they'll have everything lined up, evaluators, documents, witnesses. You have to move smart. Rick nodded slowly. I appreciate your warning, Tom, truly, more than you know. Tom placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that felt strangely familiar after so many years. You're a good man. Rick, you didn't deserve this. He turned and walked away, leaving Rick alone with the roar of the river below. For several minutes, Rick didn't move. He let the wind brush over him, let the distant sound of traffic blend with the water's steady rhythm, trying to quiet the storm raging inside. When he finally walked back to his navigator, his steps were deliberate, almost mechanical. He wasn't the same man who had arrived an hour earlier. By the time he reached his truck, the shock had burned away, replaced by something colder, sharper, resolve. He gripped the steering wheel, staring ahead. Emily, his only child, the girl whose scraped knees he'd tended, whose college tuition he'd paid without hesitation, whose wedding he had funded despite the staggering cost. How long had she been planning this? How many times had she looked at him with a smile while secretly plotting to take his freedom? And Brandon smug, smooth-talking Brandon, how much of this was his idea? The drive to Whitmore's office took 20 minutes. Rick wasn't planning to confront anyone, not yet. But he needed to see the place where the betrayal had been organized. The office tower rose sleek and modern against the sky, all glass and steel, the kind of building wealthy families trusted with their most intimate legal matters. Inside the lobby, everything smelled of leather and expensive cologne. The receptionist recognized him immediately. Mr. Dawson, are you here to discuss the Jacobson contract review? Rick forced a calm smile. Actually, I'd like to speak with Ed Whitmore about my will, and some other legal questions. The receptionist nodded and guided him to the waiting area. He sat on a leather chair, his mind racing. He wasn't here to demand answers. He was here to gather evidence, to confirm. Minutes later, Ed Whitmore stepped out of his office, a warm smile plastered across his face. He was tall, distinguished, with the confident posture of a man accustomed to managing fortunes. Rick. What a pleasant surprise. Come in. Rick followed him quietly, taking in every detail: the expensive art, the diplomas, the thick mahogany desk. I hear Emily was here recently. Rick began casually. Whitmore's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. Yes, she had some questions about protective legal measures, guardianship procedures. She said she was concerned about your health. Rick's pulse spiked, but he kept his expression neutral. She's always been detail-oriented. Whitmore nodded. She asked for documents outlining procedures for establishing guardianship, requirements, medical evaluations, court filings, the whole process. He pulled a file from his drawer. I made her copies. Rick accepted the stack of photocopied forms, flipping through page after page of instructions on how to legally strip someone of their independence. So thorough, Rick murmured. Whitmore hesitated before adding, her fiancé had questions too. Brandon asked about business transfer procedures, asset protections during legal proceedings. He seemed very interested in corporate valuations. A chill crept through Rick's chest. There it was. Confirmation. Everything Tom told him was real. Emily and Brandon were preparing to destroy him. And now, Rick knew exactly how they intended to do it. Rick walked out of Whitmore's office with a manila envelope tucked under his arm, each page inside it like a blade pressing into his ribs. The elevator ride down felt endless. The polished doors reflected a man who no longer recognized himself, a father holding proof that his own daughter was preparing to erase him. When he stepped into the parking structure, he didn't start the navigator right away. He sat in silence, flipping through the documents again, absorbing the weight of every detail. Guardianship petitions, medical competency requirements, steps for transferring control of finances, court timelines. It was all there in black and white, neatly printed instructions on how to rob a man of his autonomy. And Emily had asked for every bit of it. He closed his eyes. He could almost hear her voice at Christmas last year. Telling relatives he seemed tired. He could see her exchanging glances with Brandon during family dinners when he momentarily forgot a detail or paused to recall a date. At the time, he chalked it up to generational differences. Young people worried too much, he thought. But now he understood. They had been rehearsing their case. He gripped the steering wheel, the leather groaning under the pressure of his hands. Everything inside him hurt. Betrayal, disbelief tightened into a single, unnervingly calm thought. I need to see it for myself. He drove home, the suburban streets passing like a blur. His house in Minnetonka stood exactly as it always had, quiet, dignified. A place where Margaret once planted flowers in the spring and Emily learned to ride a bike in the driveway. Nothing about it suggested the danger that lived inside. When he stepped through the front door at exactly noon, the air felt too still. Dad Emily's voice floated from the kitchen before she appeared, her face flushed with the kind of concern that would have fooled anyone else. "We were worried," she said, hurrying toward him. "You didn't answer your phone last night." Behind her, Brandon walked in from the living room. His posture was careful, observant, the posture of a man studying a subject for behavioral evidence. "I stayed at a hotel," Rick said lightly, shrugging off his jacket. "Couldn't sleep at home." Brandon's eyes sharpened. "That's unusual. Rick, maybe you should see a doctor about the stress." The words tasted metallic in Rick's mouth. He forced a chuckle. "Maybe I should." Emily reached out to adjust his collar, the gesture tender on the surface, but watchful underneath. "Where's your phone?" "Dad." "We tried calling over and over." Rick patted his pockets, frowning. "I thought I had it." Both of them watched him closely, waiting hungry for a sign of confusion. He let his brow knit just slightly, scanning the counter as if uncertain. "Oh," Emily said gently, pointing to the table. "You left it right here." "Ah," Rick murmured. "Silly me." Brandon pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. Notes, Rick realized, evidence, documentation of his forgetfulness. Their confidence was astonishing. Rick breathed slowly, using every ounce of discipline he possessed to stay soft, stay vulnerable, stay exactly what they expected him to be. "I think I'll make some tea," he said, walking toward the kitchen. From the corner of his eye, he caught them exchanging a look, the look of schemers congratulating themselves. They really believed he was fading. They really thought this would be easy. He stirred the tea slowly, letting their whispered conversation travel across the quiet room. "He seemed worse today," Brandon murmured. "The evaluation is next week," Emily replied. "Whitmore said the petition will go through quickly if we bring enough evidence." Rick's spoon clinked against the cup. They didn't pause. "Good thing we already reviewed the papers." Brandon whispered, "Everything will be ready by the honeymoon." Emily exhaled shakily. "Once this is over, Dad will finally get the care he needs, and we'll be able to focus on our life, their life built on the ashes of his." He returned to the living room with his tea, his footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. Emily helped him into his armchair as if he were fragile. Brandon watched his movements with thinly veiled anticipation. "Dad," Emily said sweetly, "Brandon and I can handle the wedding details today." "You just relax," Rick nodded. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something." Both of them leaned forward. "I've been thinking about the company," he continued, letting his voice waver. "What will happen when I'm too old to manage everything?" Emily's eyes lit up bright with hope, not concern. "Don't worry about that now," she said quickly. "We'll help you when the time comes." "Yes," Rick murmured. "But suppose something happened to me. Suppose I became unable to make decisions." Brandon jumped in smoothly. "That's why Emily and I have been reviewing your contracts. We want to keep the business running strong." Rick raised his brows, feigning surprise. "You've studied my contracts, all of them," Brandon said proudly. "The Dawson Ridge project, the Westfield expansion, the equipment leasing with Caterpillar. I've identified areas where consolidation could increase profitability." Rick's heart clenched, but he kept his face slack with gratitude. "You two think of everything," he said softly. Emily leaned closer, her tone gentle. "Dad, you don't need to worry about business anymore. When you're ready, we'll take over." Rick nodded, pretending to think deeply. "I'm lucky to have children like you," he murmured. Then, as if on cue, his phone buzzed in Emily's pocket, a text message from Tom. Rick saw her eyes flick down, widen slightly, then narrow. "Just spam," she said quickly, deleting it before handing the phone back. "You really should get a new number." Rick smiled. "Maybe I will." Inside, his pulse was steady, calm, focused. They were already controlling his communication. They were already documenting his decline. They were already scheduling his downfall. He rose slowly. "I think I'll rest for a bit." "Good idea," Emily said warmly. "You need your strength for tomorrow." He walked to his study with intentionally unsteady steps. When the door clicked shut behind him, he let his entire facade collapse. His hands didn't shake from age. They shook from rage. He opened his phone and pressed record. If Emily and Brandon wanted evidence, he was about to give them all the evidence they needed. Just not the kind they expected. The study had always been Rick's sanctuary, a place lined with decades of blueprints, framed project photos, awards he never boasted about, and a worn leather chair where he'd made every major decision of his life. Today, it became a war room. He closed the blinds halfway, letting just enough daylight in to keep the room from looking suspiciously dark. Then he exhaled deeply, forcing the trembling in his hands to settle. On the outside, it needed to look like age. On the inside, it was boiling, sharpened rage. He tested the recording app on his phone, speaking softly into the microphone. The playback was clear. Good. Every trap needed the right bait. He slipped the phone into his shirt pocket, microphone facing upward, and walked back toward the living room, forcing his posture into the slight forward lean of a tired man. Emily and Brandon were still seated together on the couch. Papers spread across the coffee table, documents Rick recognized instantly. Dawson Materials contracts, financial summaries, profit projections. His private office safe had been opened. The combination hadn't changed in 15 years, and only Margaret, his late wife, and Emily ever knew it. So Emily had opened it, and Brandon had rummaged through it. The betrayal struck him again like a physical blow, but when he reached the doorway, he painted on a soft, vulnerable smile. "Feeling better, Dad?" Emily asked, her voice honeyed with false concern. "Much," Rick replied. "Actually, I'd like to continue our conversation about the company." Brandon smoothed out his tie, eager. "Of course. We want you to feel secure about the future." Rick lowered himself into his armchair with the deliberate slowness of a man who feared losing his balance. "Sometimes I think I'm getting too old for business. What will happen to the company when I can't handle the complexity anymore?" He watched Brandon's eyes flash the way a poker player's eyes might when he saw a winning hand. "Don't worry, Rick," Brandon said confidently. "We'll make sure everything is handled professionally. I've already reviewed your biggest contracts." Rick pretended to be surprised. "You know about the Westfield expansion, that one's complicated. Already studied it." Brandon replied proudly, "along with the Dawson Ridge development, your equipment leasing arrangements, and the profit margins from your last fiscal year. Dawson Materials is a gold mine, but with modern management techniques, it could be even more profitable." Emily leaned in, her smile bright and warm on the surface. "Dad, maybe it's time you slowed down a little. Brandon and I can take care of things. You've earned a rest." "And what would you do with the company?" Rick asked softly, tilting his head like he genuinely wanted their guidance. Brandon answered too quickly. "Well, for starters, there's a buyer lined up. Consolidated Construction. They've been eyeing your client list for years. They're ready to offer $47 million for the entire operation." Rick stilled. He knew Dawson Materials' valuation. $78 million at the lowest estimate, $93 if you included equipment and land assets. Brandon was planning to sell it at a devastating loss and pocket the difference. $47 million, Rick repeated, letting the words hang in the air as if he were processing something too big for his mind. Brandon nodded, slow and patronizing. "It's more than enough to keep you comfortable in your retirement. Emily and I would manage everything so you wouldn't have to worry anymore." Emily added, "Maybe you could even travel somewhere warm, live someplace peaceful. Arizona has wonderful assisted living communities." Rick's stomach twisted. They had already chosen the state where they intended to place him. The confidence of their betrayal was staggering. He inhaled shakily, letting the pretense of fragility return. "And my house, I've lived here for 35 years. Don't worry about the house," Emily said gently. "We'll handle the sale. These decisions are too complicated for you now." Rick nodded along, fighting the instinct to scream. Brandon's phone lit up. He checked the screen. "Oh, Dr. Hale can move your evaluation to Tuesday morning," he said casually. "I'll call him back. Dr. Stephen Hale, the same doctor Tom said had been investigated for insurance fraud." Rick let just enough confusion appear on his face. "Evaluation? What evaluation?" "Just a routine checkup." "Dad," Emily replied, sliding closer to him. "Dr. Hale specializes in age-related cognitive changes. We just want to make sure you're healthy." Rick gave a soft, wavering smile. "You two think of everything." Then he rose and shuffled toward the kitchen, leaning into the persona they believed was real. He didn't rush. He let his steps falter just slightly, the image of a man slipping. As he warmed water for tea, their conversation continued clearly in the next room, perfect for the microphone in his pocket. "Tuesday works perfectly," Brandon said into the phone. "Yes, the family is very concerned. Memory issues and confusion, difficulty with complex decisions. No, he won't resist. He trusts us completely." Rick felt his jaw tighten so hard he feared cracking a tooth. Emily spoke next. "Whitmore said we can file the guardianship petition on Wednesday. Court date could be Friday morning if we present compelling medical evidence. A week. They plan to dismantle his entire life in a week." He walked back into the living room, tea in both hands, eyes soft with feigned disorientation. I couldn't help overhearing. "You're arranging a doctor's appointment for me?" Emily nodded sweetly. "We love you, Dad. We just want to make sure you're okay." Rick's phone buzzed again from his pocket. Emily stiffened. She recognized the vibration pattern. He saw it in the flash of her expression. Before he could react, she reached out. "Here, Dad, let me check that for you." He held the phone out obediently. The message on the screen was from Tom. "Everything okay? Stay strong." Emily's thumb hovered over the message for only a second before she deleted it. "Spam," she said with a soft smile. "Nothing important." Rick watched her carefully. She had no idea she was being recorded. No idea she had just erased evidence that would later damn her. He sank back into his chair. "As fragile as porcelain. You two take such good care of me," he murmured. Emily stroked his arm. "Of course we do." "Yes," Brandon said, voice dripping with certainty. "You can trust us." In Rick's chest, something hard and cold settled permanently. "You have no idea how much." He nodded slowly and let his gaze drift downward as if exhaustion were pulling him under. But behind the performance, his mind was sharp, calculating, mapping every step of what came next. If they wanted to prove he was incompetent, he would show them exactly how competent he could be. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that made every shadow in Rick's house feel sharper. He'd slept only a few hours, but exhaustion didn't weaken him. It strengthened his resolve. Years of building a company from the ground up had taught him how to operate under pressure, how to think strategically, how to move when everyone else believed he was frozen. He left the house before sunrise. Emily and Brandon wouldn't be awake for hours, and he wanted them to believe he was simply confused, wandering around town or checking up on wedding details like an anxious old father. In reality, he was about to dismantle their entire plan. The drive to Dawson Materials took 23 minutes through light morning traffic. Every mile felt like stepping back into the version of himself he thought he'd lost: the builder, the negotiator, the man whose mind could slice through chaos with precision. His assistant, Linda Porter, looked up from her computer when he walked into the reception area. "Mr. Dawson," she said. Startled, "I didn't expect to see you. Isn't the wedding rehearsal tonight?" Rick forced a weary smile. "Yes. But there are a few things I need to handle first. Please clear my schedule until noon." "Of course," Linda said. Sensing something in his tone, she didn't ask questions. She never had. Rick closed the office door behind him and sank into his leather chair. The faint scent of cedar from the bookshelves, the hum of the HVAC system. Everything here felt familiar, grounding. He opened his laptop and began with the first critical task: Blackwood Investigations, a private firm he'd used before. Quiet, efficient, ruthless when necessary. He called their director directly. "James, it's Rick Dawson. I need comprehensive background checks on 2 people. Rush order. Their names are Brandon Miller and Dr. Stephen Hale." James didn't waste time with curiosity. "We'll get on it immediately." "Sir." Rick hung up and moved on to step 2, dialing Linda through the office intercom. "Linda, I need to add additional guests to the wedding list." She blinked in surprise. "Additional? How many, everyone?" Rick said calmly. "Call Aunt Catherine in Phoenix, Uncle Daniel in Chicago, all the cousins. I want the whole family at the wedding." Her eyebrows rose. "That's quite a list. Are you sure? Very. Tell them it's important. Tell them I insist." There was something almost cathartic about it, bringing in witnesses. Not because he wanted to embarrass Emily, but because he knew what was coming. People needed to see it. She needed to see it reflected in the eyes of those who once adored her. 2 hours later, James from Blackwood Investigations called back. "Rick, we dug fast, and Brandon Miller's got gambling debts totaling $340,000, owed to casinos in Nevada, tribal casinos in Minnesota, and a private lender in California." Rick felt heat rise in his chest, not fiery anger, but cold, triumphant clarity. "And Dr. Hale?" he asked. James hesitated. "Investigated twice for insurance fraud. Never convicted, but his record's dirty. He's the type who'll give whatever diagnosis someone pays for." "Send me everything," Rick said. "It's already in your inbox." Rick ended the call, exhaled slowly, and leaned back in his chair, The illusion of Emily marrying a good man had shattered completely. Brandon wasn't just greedy, he was drowning. And he'd decided Rick's life was the lifeline. Rick moved on to the next step, legal countermeasure. He called one of the only attorneys in Minnesota who outranked Whitmore in elder law, Michael Grant. A man Rick trusted more than most people, someone respected, feared, and famously uncompromising. Michael, it's Rick Dawson. I need to modify my will and add protective clauses. Urgently. Michael didn't ask why. Come to my office at 3. Rick closed the laptop. The foundation of his counterattack was in place. Now he needed the right stage. Wedding stage. He picked up his phone and called Thompson Audio Visual. This is Rick Dawson. I need professional audio equipment delivered to Riverview Banquet Hall this Saturday. Wireless microphones, full-range speakers, a mixer, something powerful enough for 200 people. 200, the technician asked. I thought your guest list was smaller. It grew, Rick said simply. We'll take care of everything. Good. He wasn't just planning to expose them. He was planning to do it perfectly. By Wednesday afternoon, the entire wedding infrastructure had been quietly expanded. Linda had confirmed an extra 60 guests. Caterers increased orders. Rental companies added tables. The florist doubled the arrangements. No one questioned him. He was the father of the bride. His wishes were commands. Late that evening, Rick sat at the dining room table, reviewing the new will Michael Grant finalized. Everything went to charity. Any attempt to challenge his mental competency would trigger automatic criminal investigation for fraud. Emily and Brandon were legally barred from accessing any part of his estate. Rick closed the folder and stared at the family photos lining the hallway wall. Emily on her first day of kindergarten. Emily with braids and ice cream on her face. Emily hugging him at her high school graduation. The girl in those photos felt like a memory from someone else's life. The next day, he approached Emily casually while she sipped coffee at the kitchen counter. I've been thinking about your wedding gift, Rick said warmly. Emily smiled, eyes softening. Dad, the earrings are beautiful. You don't need to give us anything else. No, this is something more personal, Rick replied. I'd like to give a speech at the reception about family, about trust, about the future. Emily stiffened, the smile freezing on her lips. A speech, she repeated. Yes. Rick placed a hand on her shoulder, and I've invited more family members. Aunt Catherine, Uncle Daniel, the cousins you know, everyone who matters. This is a moment worth sharing widely. A flicker of panic flared in her eyes. Before she could respond, Brandon stepped in from the hallway, jaw tight. Rick, maybe keeping things small would be less overwhelming for you. Nonsense, Rick said, laughing softly. This is the happiest moment of my life. I want everyone to hear what I have to say, and I've arranged professional audio equipment to make sure they do. Emily's face lost all color. Brandon's did too. Rick smiled gently, almost kindly. It's going to be a night no one will ever forget, he said. They believed he meant sentimental, but he meant something else entirely. Saturday arrived with a crispness that made the air feel sharper, cleaner, almost ceremonial. Riverview Banquet Hall stretched elegantly along the Mississippi River, its massive windows catching the late afternoon light like polished crystal. It was the kind of venue Emily had dreamed of since she was a teenager, romantic, expensive, saturated with quiet prestige. Rick arrived at precisely 2 o'clock, stepping out of his Navigator with the same steady composure he once carried into million-dollar contract negotiations. In one hand, he held his briefcase. In the other, the Tiffany bag, the earrings that had started this spiral. Inside, the hall was a hive of soft commotion. Servers dressed in black moved between tables, adjusting silverware and floral centerpieces. The white roses Emily had chosen were everywhere, lush and fragrant, paired with flickering candles that danced against glass. This should have been a beautiful day. Instead, it was a battlefield. A young technician in a black suit hurried toward him. Mr. Dawson. I'm Ethan Ross from Thompson Audio Visual. We're just finishing the setup. Show me, Rick said. Ethan led him to the head table, where 4 wireless microphones sat waiting beside the elegant place settings. Across the hall, speakers had been placed strategically for maximum coverage. "We've tested everything," Ethan said. "Your phone connects automatically. Just link it through Bluetooth. Anything you play will go through the entire hall." Rick nodded. "Good. This speech is important." He tested one microphone. His voice carried effortlessly, echoing through the empty room with chilling clarity. Aunt Catherine appeared behind him, wearing a navy dress and a warm smile. "Rick, you look, well." For a man about to give away his daughter, Rick hugged her, briefly and tightly. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. You said it was important," she said gently, "and I trust you." "Rick, always have." Her kindness cut deeper than she knew. He spent the next 30 minutes greeting the relatives Linda had called earlier in the week. Cousins, nieces, nephews, people who hadn't seen Emily in years, all buzzing with excitement about the wedding and curiosity about Rick's sudden request. "Big day," Uncle Daniel said, clasping Rick's shoulder firmly. "You holding up?" Rick smiled thinly, "Doing my best." The truth was, his heart was splitting in two, the father who loved his daughter, and the man who had no choice but to expose her. At 4:30, Emily appeared at the top of the staircase in her wedding gown, luminous and breathtaking. The dress hugged her figure perfectly, a soft cascade of fabric trailing behind her. She was every bit the bride he once imagined her to be. She saw him, and for a moment, just a moment, the little girl he raised flickered through her expression. Then fear replaced it. "Dad," she said, pulling him aside, "why did you invite the whole family?" Rick brushed a stray curl from her face. "Because everyone should witness a day like this." Emily's throat tightened. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know how much. Not yet. Brandon joined them, his tuxedo impossibly crisp, his smile forced. "Rick," he said carefully, "if you're feeling overwhelmed today, maybe we should postpone the speech. Big crowds can be tough." Rick chuckled softly. No, I'm feeling more clear-headed than ever." Brandon swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Photography began. Rick posed with Emily, arm around her waist, smiling as though nothing at all was wrong. The images would one day become evidence of the last moments before the truth detonated. During dinner, guests chatted warmly, glasses clinking, laughter rising in waves. The hall was beautiful golden candlelight reflected in crystal, soft jazz mingling with the sound of celebration. From the outside looking in, it was perfect. Only Rick knew it was the calm before a storm. As dessert plates were collected, the wedding coordinator approached with her clipboard. "Mr. Dawson, whenever you're ready, you may begin your speech." Rick rose slowly, sliding the wireless microphone into his hand. He walked toward the center of the hall with deliberate, steady steps. The murmur of conversation quieted, replaced by a chorus of turning heads and curious eyes. Emily watched him, frozen. Brandon gripped the edge of the table. Several relatives leaned forward, sensing the tension beneath the surface. Rick stood beneath the chandelier, lifted the microphone, and began. "Dear friends and family," he said. His voice carried beautifully clear, resonant, firm. "Thank you all for joining us on this very special day." Warm smiles met his words. Most father of the bride speeches talk about love, laughter, and the beauty of starting a new chapter. He paused, breath controlled. This one is a little different. A faint ripple of confusion spread across the room. "Marriage," Rick said, "is about trust, about loyalty, about choosing someone who stands beside you, not someone who takes advantage of you." Brandon's jaw clenched. Emily's fingers tightened around her napkin. Rick continued, his face composed. "In the past week, I learned something important, something painful, something that no parent should ever have to learn." The hall had fallen completely silent. The candles flickered, the only movement in the room. Rick lifted his phone. And I believe the truth deserves to be heard. He tapped the audio file. Brandon's voice filled the hall, instantly cold, calculating, unmistakable. The old man won't understand anything soon. We'll sell everything and live comfortably while he's in assisted living, drooling into his soup. Several guests gasped. Emily's eyes widened in horror. Another clip played. We'll get witnesses for his memory problems. Whitmore said we just need enough evidence to push the petition through. A ripple of revulsion tore through the crowd. Rick raised his head, voice steady. This is what my daughter and her fiancé have been planning, to declare me mentally incompetent, to take my company, my home, my freedom. Emily stood abruptly, face crumpling. Dad, please, Rick held up a hand. I'm not finished. The next clip played. Emily's voice trembled through the speakers, undeniable. Dad barely leaves the house anyway. Once the evaluation is done, the court will side with us. He won't fight it. A collective gasp shook the room. Emily covered her face, sobbing. Brandon stood, shouting. He's confused. None of this, Rick cut him off. Confused. Let me provide more clarity. He opened the manila folder. Here, he said, holding up a document, are the guardianship papers Emily requested. And here, he continued, pulling another sheet, is the company valuation Brandon planned to use to sell Dawson Materials for $47 million, nearly $30 million below its worth. And here, he added, voice tightening, are the records of Brandon's gambling debts. Gasps erupted again. Aunt Catherine actually stood up from her seat, hand over her heart. Rick closed the folder with a soft snap. Then he looked directly at Emily, his daughter, his only child. I loved you more than anything, he said quietly, voice cracking for the first time. But you chose greed over family. Emily sobbed uncontrollably. Brandon shouted curses. The room dissolved into chaos. Rick lifted the microphone one last time. I changed my will yesterday. Everything I own now goes to charity, and any attempt to claim otherwise will be treated as criminal fraud. Emily, Brandon, you inherit nothing. The hall went still. Rick placed the microphone on the table. Then he walked away from the wreckage of his daughter's wedding, leaving behind the scattered remains of trust, love, and innocence. The wedding hall, once a palace of candlelight and celebration, had transformed into a battleground of broken illusions. Gasps, whispers, chairs scraping against the marble floor, everything blended into a chaotic hum as Rick walked away from the microphone stand. The truth had detonated, and the fallout spread through the hall like smoke. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. Behind him, Emily collapsed onto her chair, her white gown pooling around her like a fallen angel's broken wings. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks in dark rivers. Dad, please, she sobbed. Please, just listen. We didn't mean. Brandon interrupted, voice rising in fury. Rick, you crazy old man. You're twisting everything. You're losing your mind and blaming us for it. The last of the wedding guests froze mid-movement at that accusation. It was one thing to betray a father. It was another to double down on the lie in front of 200 witnesses. Rick turned back slowly, his expression calm, eerily calm. The type of calm that came not from peace, but from certainty. Losing my mind, he said softly, let's ask the room. He took a step toward Brandon, his polished shoes clicking against the floor with controlled precision. Does anyone here believe I seem confused today? Lost, incompetent? No one answered. Not a single hand moved. Even the servers paused where they stood, because Rick had never looked more clear-headed in his life. Brandon's face twisted, frustration clawing at his composure. You're manipulating them. All of you, he's staging this. He's trying to make us look bad. Aunt Catherine stepped forward, her voice trembling with controlled rage. Brandon, we heard your voice. We heard what you planned. Don't you dare blame him. Uncle Daniel joined her, pointing an accusatory finger at Brandon. You talked about putting Rick in assisted living. You talked about witnesses. Don't pretend you didn't. Brandon's face reddened. Emily and I were just worried about him. You people don't understand. He's getting older. He forgets things. Rick met his eyes. I forget nothing. Then he turned to Emily, whose hands were shaking so violently her wedding ring clinked against the table. Emily, Rick said quietly, look at me. It took her several seconds, but she finally lifted her head. Her face was blotchy, streaked with tears, the picture of shattered innocence, but behind it, he saw something else. Not remorse, not yet. Fear. Dad, Emily whispered, voice cracking. I swear, we just wanted to help you. We were worried. You've been tired, and sometimes you seem older, Rick finished. Emily blinked rapidly. No, I didn't mean, yes, you did. Rick's voice held no anger, only truth. You saw me slow down. You mistook aging for weakness, and you thought you could take advantage of it. Emily pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. I didn't, I swear. I didn't. But Rick continued, his tone quiet but devastating. You used my grief for Mom as evidence of decline. You used my trust as fuel for your plan. You used my love as your weapon. A harsh sob escaped Emily's throat. Brandon suddenly slammed his palm onto the table. Enough. This is ridiculous. We were planning for the future, for Emily's protection, for your protection. Rick raised one eyebrow. By selling my company for $30 million less than it's worth to pay off your gambling debts. Brandon froze. The room erupted in whispers again. You don't know anything about my finances, Brandon snapped. You don't have any proof. Rick opened his briefcase with unhurried precision. Actually, he said, pulling out a document, I have everything. He held up enlarged, printed screenshots, Brandon's debt records, credit alerts, casino statements, and a report from Blackwood Investigations. Brandon's eyes widened. You had me investigated. Rick's voice remained steady. At the same time, you were plotting to steal my company. Yes, I did. Brandon lunged forward, fists clenched, but Ethan Ross, the young AV technician, stepped in instinctively. He wasn't hired as security, but the look on Brandon's face made even strangers sense danger. Don't, Ethan warned. Just don't. Brandon froze, chest heaving. Rick closed the briefcase and turned back to Emily. This wasn't a misunderstanding, he said. It was a conspiracy. Emily was shaking uncontrollably, tears dropping onto the white silk of her dress. And, Dad, I don't know what to say. I thought I was doing the right thing. Brandon said. Rick's heart squeezed not with sympathy, but with a grief so old it felt new again. For a moment he saw the little girl who used to run across the backyard barefoot, who made him Father's Day cards out of construction paper, who cried into his shirt whenever she lost a school friend or scraped her knee. But that girl was gone, and the woman in front of him had chosen her path long before today. Emily, he said softly, you had every chance to come to me, every chance to talk, to be honest, to be my daughter. She sobbed harder. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. Rick shook his head slowly. You're sorry because you were caught, not because of what you did. That truth broke her. She collapsed forward, face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. Rick stood still, letting the silence settle again. Then he spoke with finality. Emily, Brandon, you have 48 hours to remove your belongings from my house. After that, the locks change. Gasps rippled through the room. Emily lifted her head, horrified. Dad, no. Please, please don't turn me away. I have nowhere to go. Rick's voice softened, not with forgiveness, but with resignation. Actions have consequences. Emily, even for the people we love. He turned away from the table, ready to leave the hall entirely. The guests parted instinctively, creating a clear path behind him. Emily cried out raw, anguished. Dad, don't leave me. Please, don't leave me alone. Rick stopped for a single breath, but he didn't turn. You left me, he said quietly, long before I ever walked away, and with that, he stepped out of the wedding hall, leaving behind the ashes of a daughter he once believed would never betray him. Rick stepped into the cool evening air outside the banquet hall, leaving behind a trail of shocked whispers and scattered fragments of what was supposed to be a wedding celebration. The Mississippi River stretched quietly behind the building, its slow current reflecting the dimming sky. The contrast between the gentle dusk and the emotional wreckage inside was so stark it almost felt cruel. He inhaled deeply, letting the cold air settle the turmoil inside him. People imagined revenge as fire and fury, but the reality felt strangely hollow. There was no triumph in exposing the truth, only the grim weight of necessity. He crossed the parking lot, passing rows of cars left abandoned by guests who had chosen to walk away early, unable to bear what they'd witnessed. He reached his Lincoln Navigator, opened the door, and rested both hands on the roof, letting the metal cool beneath his palms. Rick. He turned. Standing near the entrance, half in shadow, was Tom Gallagher. Tom looked exhausted, relieved, but weighed down by guilt and years of regret. He walked forward slowly, hands tucked in the pockets of a worn jacket. "You did what had to be done," Tom said quietly. Rick shook his head. "I didn't want to do it." "Of course you didn't," Tom replied. "That's why it means something." They stood together for a moment, saying nothing. Cars hummed along the avenue in the distance, and somewhere a train horn sounded life moving on, indifferent to human heartbreak. Tom exhaled heavily. "I'm sorry, Rick. I can't imagine how much this hurts." Rick looked back at the glowing hall windows, where silhouettes of guests still moved like restless ghosts. "You gave me the warning that saved my life," he said. "I owe you for that." Tom shook his head. "No, I owed you first, and I wasn't going to let your daughter do to you what I did in my own way." Rick studied him, finally seeing the years of guilt Tom carried, the shame of their broken partnership. Tom had betrayed him once, but today, he'd saved him. Maybe old partners really do look out for each other. Rick murmured. Tom smiled faintly. Maybe the smart ones do. A gust of wind rustled the trees. The reception hall's sliding doors opened and closed as guests continued filtering out, some crying, some arguing, some quiet with shock. Rick wondered what they saw him as now: a victim, a hero, or a man who'd lost his daughter. After a long silence, Tom spoke again. "You heading home?" "Yeah," Rick said softly. "I have 48 hours to get their things packed." Tom hesitated. "Do you want help?" Rick shook his head. "This is something I need to do alone." Tom placed a hand on his shoulder. "If you ever need anything, you call me." Rick nodded, unable to find words. Tom walked away first, disappearing into the soft glow of parking lot lights. Rick finally slid into the driver's seat. His hands rested on the steering wheel, steady but heavy, as if he were anchoring himself in place. He didn't start the car right away. He just sat, letting the weight of the night settle on him. He had won. He had stopped them. But victory tasted bitter. He backed out slowly, the tires crunching over gravel as he left the hall behind. The streets of Minneapolis were alive with Saturday night energy, young couples heading to dinner, families on evening walks, music spilling from open doorways. Lights twinkled against the river like small flames refusing to die. Inside the car, however, the silence was suffocating. He drove toward Minnetonka, the 37-minute route etched into his muscle memory. For the first time in years, the familiar drive felt foreign. Every turn, every traffic light, every stretch of highway reminded him of moments shared with Emily. School pickups, trips to ice cream shops, late-night talks about her dreams, or dreams he'd thought were pure, dreams he'd built his life around supporting. The closer he got to home, the emptier he felt. When he finally pulled into his driveway, the house loomed quietly in the darkness. It was a house he had bought with pride, renovated with Margaret, filled with Emily's laughter long before the world taught her about ambition and betrayal. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence felt different here, heavier, more personal. He turned on the entryway light. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, the framed photos on the wall, the vase of flowers Emily had placed on the table when she first moved back after her engagement, the faint scent of lavender air freshener. These familiar comforts now felt like lies. Rick hung his keys on the hook, set his briefcase down, and walked toward the living room. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. He looked around at the space that once felt like a home. Now it was an echo chamber of broken trust. He found himself standing in front of a framed photo of Emily on her 10th birthday, missing front tooth, frosting on her cheek, eyes full of unfiltered joy. He traced the edge of the frame with his thumb. "I did everything for you," he whispered. The photo didn't offer answers. It simply stared back with the innocence of a child long gone. He turned away and began gathering her belongings. The books she left on the coffee table, the jacket draped over the staircase railing, the half-finished scrapbook she'd been making for the wedding. Every item felt like removing a piece of his own heart. He packed them carefully, not with anger, but with the tenderness of a father who still loved the child she once was. Upstairs, he found her toiletries, her makeup bag, her jewelry box. In the guest room she and Brandon used, he stripped their bed, folded their clothes, emptied drawers. It took hours. By the time he finished, it was nearly midnight. Boxes filled the hallway like silent witnesses to the end of something precious. Rick sank into his armchair, the one Emily had guided him into just days earlier, as if he were frail. Now he sat tall, but tired, aching in places deeper than bone. He reached for the whiskey bottle by the fireplace, Macallan. The kind he only opened on rare occasions. He poured a glass, but didn't drink it. Instead, he let it sit in his hand as he stared out the window into the dark. He had defended his life. He had protected his legacy. He had revealed the truth, and in doing so, he had lost his daughter. The ultimate price of betrayal was loneliness. He lifted the glass to his lips, but stopped mid-air. He set it back down gently. Tonight wasn't for drowning pain. Tonight was for accepting reality. He leaned back, eyes closing, the house eerily silent around him. Tomorrow, he would tell Emily where to pick up her things. Tomorrow, he would change the locks. Tomorrow, life would start over. Not better, not happier, just honest. And honesty was something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Rick didn't sleep much that night. He drifted in and out of shallow dozes, waking every hour to the silence pressing against the walls. Dawn crept slowly across the sky, thin streaks of pink and gold bleeding into the dark. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, staring out the window as the world moved gently forward while his own stood still. In 48 hours, Emily and Brandon would return for their things, and then they would be gone. The thought left a hollow ache in his chest. By noon, Rick forced himself to step outside. The crisp Minnesota air bit against his skin as he checked the locks, the outdoor lights, the mailbox. Ordinary tasks made the day feel less unreal, but every shadow held the echo of Emily's laughter. Every breeze carried memories of Margaret hanging laundry, of backyard barbecues, of simpler times. Around mid-afternoon, Rick returned to the living room and sat in his armchair, letting the soft hum of the house wrap around him like an old blanket. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe, really breathe. He didn't get long. A knock came at the door. He stiffened. It wasn't Emily. Not yet. She would text first. She always did. Rick opened the door to find Aunt Catherine standing on the porch, her eyes gentle with concern. She carried a small casserole dish wrapped in a kitchen towel. "You look like you haven't eaten," she said softly, pushing her way past him in the way only family could. Rick managed a small smile. "You didn't have to come all the way back here. You're my brother's boy," she said, setting the casserole on the counter and turning to him with that familiar maternal fierceness. "And you just went through hell." Rick exhaled shakily. "I didn't want them to see that side of me. I didn't want to hurt Emily." Aunt Catherine's voice softened. "You didn't hurt her, Rick? She hurt herself, and she hurt you." Rick swallowed hard. She stepped closer and cupped his cheek gently, like she had when he was young. Loving your child doesn't mean letting them destroy you. Sometimes love means drawing a line. He lowered his gaze, ashamed of the tears threatening to gather. I miss who she used to be. So do I, Catherine whispered, but she's not that little girl anymore. And you did the right thing, even if it broke you. They talked for hours about family, about Margaret, about Emily's childhood. Rick laughed a little, cried a little, and let the heaviness loosen its grip just enough to breathe again. When Aunt Catherine finally left, she kissed his cheek and said, "You're not alone, Rick. I need you to remember that." He nodded, though he didn't entirely believe it. Done. Later that evening, as sunlight faded into the horizon, Rick sat on his porch steps with a blanket draped over his shoulders. Fireflies flickered in the distance, tiny sparks in the encroaching dusk. He watched them absently, his mind drifting. A car approached slowly down the street. He knew that sound. He knew that silver Honda. Emily. Rick tensed, gripping the railing as the car rolled to a stop in the driveway. The engine cut off. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the driver's door opened. Emily stepped out, still wearing the remnants of her wedding hairstyle. Her makeup was gone, replaced by swollen eyes and the pale, exhausted complexion of someone who hadn't slept. She hesitated before approaching the porch. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling. Rick didn't stand. He didn't move. He could hardly breathe. Emily stepped closer. I came early because I didn't want to bother you tomorrow. I needed to see you." Rick nodded faintly, waiting. She wiped a tear from her cheek. "What I did, what I planned, it was wrong. I thought I had reasons, but none of them matter now. I ruined everything." He remained silent. Emily's throat bobbed. Brandon left after the wedding, after everything. He said he didn't want to deal with the fallout. Rick closed his eyes for a long moment. Betrayal on betrayal. The man she destroyed her father for had abandoned her the moment things got hard. Emily inhaled sharply. "Dad, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I know I betrayed you. I know I broke your trust, but I'm still your daughter." Rick swallowed hard, the ache returning in full force. "You stopped being my daughter long before that wedding. Emily, you chose someone else. You chose greed." Tears spilled down her cheeks. I know, Dad, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He looked at her for a long, agonizing moment. "I loved you with everything I had," he whispered. Emily nodded, crying harder. "I know, you didn't just try to take my company." Rick continued. "You tried to take me, my life, my freedom, my dignity." Emily covered her face with her hands. "I don't know who I became. I don't know why I did it. I wasn't thinking. I was scared." Rick interrupted gently. "Scared people don't create legal petitions. Scared people don't arrange fraudulent evaluations. Scared people don't plan to sell their father's company." Emily sobbed. "I wish I could undo it. I wish you can't," Rick said softly. "Some things break and don't go back." The words hung in the air, heavier than grief. Emily wiped her cheeks again. I'll pack my things." Rick nodded. "They're in the hallway." She stepped inside without another word. He heard her soft footsteps on the hardwood, the rustle of cardboard boxes, the faint sound of her quietly crying as she gathered the last remnants of her life in his home. Minutes felt like hours. When she finally returned to the porch, carrying 2 boxes, she paused. Dad, Rick looked up. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she whispered. "But I hope one day you won't hate me." Rick breathed slowly, feeling exhaustion seep into every muscle. "I don't hate you." "Emily," a flicker of hope crossed her eyes. "I'm just done trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved." Emily flinched. He didn't soften it. She nodded shakily. "Goodbye, Dad." Rick nodded. "Goodbye, Emily." She backed away, carrying her things to the car. She loaded the boxes, climbed inside, and drove away without looking back. Rick watched the taillights disappear down the street until they faded into darkness. The night settled around him, quiet and heavy. The truth about revenge is that it never leaves you satisfied. It only gives you back what was stolen: your power, your life, your dignity. But it never returns what mattered most. Rick sat on the porch for a long time, letting the silence wash over him. He had survived betrayal. He had saved himself. He had rebuilt the line between love and destruction, and when he finally rose to go inside, he whispered to the darkness, "I hope you find your way. Emily, even if it's without me." The door closed behind him with a soft click, a quiet ending, a clean break, a life reclaimed, and a heart forever changed.